Welcome back on The Clash tonight. Are those who refuse the vaccine selfish? Well, Michael Gove certainly thinks so. Take a look at what he said on a visit to Glasgow this week.
Well, for people who can't be vaccinated, I think that certainly mandatory testing is a useful tool in our armoury. But ultimately, if you can be vaccinated and you refuse to, that's a selfish act. You're putting other people's lives and health at risk. You should get vaccinated. If you deliberately refuse to get vaccinated, and there are certain venues and certain events that require a certain level of safety, then, the terms on which you will be able to get into those venues and those events, they'll be barred to you.
Will they just? Some Tory MPs think that's all just a little threat from the government, though. Last night, here on Tonight Live, the superstar panel of Daisy McAndrew, John Gaunt and Abby Roberts debated this tweet by Dan Hodges, a columnist for The Mail on Sunday, who's a friend of the show too. I didn't have the tweet at hand then, so I think it's important to share it with you in full. So Dan tweeted, "The anti-vaxxers have had their fun. They're now engaged in open incitement to murder. It's time for arrests, prosecutions and serious jail time." So to debate all of this with me now are Matthew Lesh. He is the head of research at the Adam Smith Institute, who says that life cannot get back to normal without vaccinations. Also here, social commentator Emma Webb, who says everyone must have sovereignty over their bodies in a free and safe society. And joining me too, Calum Semple OBE, Professor of Outbreak Medicine at the University of Liverpool, who brings a medical perspective to this debate, saying that young people need to be aware of the long-term risks related to COVID hospitalisation. So, Matthew Lesh, why are people selfish if they don't get the jab? Surely that's a decision for an individual to make.
It is a decision for the individual to make whether or not they want to get a vaccine. But choosing not to get a vaccine is by definition selfish. Getting a vaccine is easy, it's safe, it's costless to you, it's conveniently available all over the country. Now, the absolutely worst, most likely thing to happen to you is a sore arm or a bit of tiredness. That is the cost side of the equation. The benefit to the community is overwhelming. It is vaccines that have got us out of terrible lockdowns and meant that society is getting back to normal. It's thanks to that we're able to live the way we are in the UK, which so many other places aren't and are back in lockdowns. On top of that, when you have a vaccine, you reduce the likelihood of getting the virus and you reduce the likelihood of transmitting the virus, even if you still become sick with COVID. That means in practice that when you get vaccinated, you are protecting everyone else in the community as well, because there are some people out there who can't get vaccinated, or there's some people out there who vaccines aren't very effective for because they're immunocompromised. Now, the extent to which you can play your part in getting vaccinated is helping reduce the potential spread to those people, and is therefore good for society at large. This is ultimately a question about the duties we have to others in society. Should we have the responsibility when it is costless for us or near costless for us to get vaccinated? It's good for our own purposes, of course, but also good for society at large.
OK, so Emma Webb, Matthew Lesh says, look, we've got to do this for wider society. Even if you're hesitant, even if you're a little bit nervous, you're selfish if you don't go ahead with the jab. Why is he wrong?
Well, I think that there's a point to be made here about the narrative that is developing around people who choose not to have the vaccine, and the whole idea that it's acceptable for the government to essentially threaten or bully the population by saying that they won't be able to fully participate in social life if they refuse to have a particular medical intervention. So I think actually when we're talking about whether or not people are selfish, if we're talking about the good of society overall, we need to think also about the precedent this is setting with regards to bodily autonomy, because the precedent that this is really setting is one of a lack of respect for people's right to have sovereignty over their own body and what they do with their body. And so I think when we're talking about whether or not people are selfish for not having the vaccination. It's a sort of demonisation, as we saw from Michael Gove there, that suggests that because these people are immoral, that it's acceptable to exclude them from society because of this pursuit of a particular public health goal. And I think we should be very worried about the precedent that that sets.
OK, so Calum Semple, you've heard from both sides of the debate there. Where do you stand? Is it a selfish decision from your medical perspective if a young person chooses not to get jabbed?
Well, the programme's called The Clash, so it thrives on a rigorous and healthy debate. But there is a middle ground here. Now, I'm going to give a shout out from a local chip shop because it's relevant to the argument. But I was down in Giorgio's. The young gentleman that was serving me, so he was vaccine hesitant. He's going to visit his grandfather in Cyprus, who's been treated for cancer. So that swayed him to take the vaccine, not to protect himself, but to protect a loved family member. On the other side of the argument, there is the issue about autonomy. When the virus prevalence is high and you want to open up society, then there's a price to that because vaccination may need to be the price of cooperation so you can open up the nightclubs or alternatively subject yourself to the test. Now, you don't have to go to a nightclub and you could wait 3 or 4 months till the virus levels are lower. But I'm a doctor. I had to prove that I was immune to measles, mumps and rubella and chickenpox to become a paediatrician. I had to have hepatitis B vaccination just to become a medical student. If I want to fly to parts of Africa, I have to take yellow fever.
So this is just part of life. It's just part of life.
So there's always decisions to be made. And if you want to cooperate in some aspects, there's a loss of degree of autonomy. I could choose not to be a medical student 30 odd years ago, and I could choose not to travel to Africa.
Matthew Lesh, the issue that I have in all of this is that I think the really divisive language by people like Michael Gove actually just undermines what folk like you and him are trying to achieve. Because do you not understand that by calling people who are vaccine hesitant selfish and by moving towards coercion, actually all you do is harden their position? Actually, the best way to try and convince people who are nervous or worried or maybe a little bit anti the vaccine is with education rather than by sort of this barrage of negative language.
Look, to be absolutely clear, I do not support coercing people to take the vaccine, and I don't support the government mandating vaccine passport.
No, but I'm talking about the language, this divisive language, calling these people selfish.
Well, I think the fact of the matter is that most people in Britain have chosen to get the vaccine. 9 in 10 people have got a first shot, and even 2/3 of young people have got a first shot. And those extremely high levels, people have chosen to protect themselves and have chosen to protect their community. I agree with you, Dan. We should be having a positivist case about this, but we shouldn't shy away from the fact that you have responsibilities to others in the community, and that's what this debate's about to me.
But Emma Webb, if you're calling these folk selfish, if you're slamming them, if you're threatening them with a two-tier society, I promise you, I know lots of these people, all it does is make them dig their heels in.
Yeah, and calling someone selfish is really part and parcel of the entire perspective that seems to be underlying the government's acceptance of the idea that you should coerce people into behaving in a way that the government want you to behave, because it shows a lack of respect for people's choices, for their own decision making. And so when people like Dominic Raab, for example, talk about coaxing and cajoling people into taking the vaccine, and then suggest that once that is the case, then maybe the vaccine passports won't be necessary, that won't be something that would be so important anymore. It just suggests that the government really have lost respect for people's autonomy, for their bodily autonomy, for their right to have sovereignty over what goes into their body. And I think ultimately what someone decides to do in terms of vaccines or in terms of any other medical intervention is their business and their business only, which is another reason why all of this talk around vaccine passports is concerning, because it also there are complications, ethical issues to do with medical confidentiality. So I think what we're seeing in the language that is being used by Michael Gove, by Dominic Raab, by Boris Johnson, just goes to show the lack of respect they have for the public pandemic and failing to recognise that there are a multitude of reasons why people might be hesitant to take the vaccine that might be legitimate.
I completely agree with that. Calum Semple, let me give the last word to you. What would be the language that you would use with a young person who might be feeling hesitant to get jabbed? I presume you're not just going to say, you're selfish. How would you convince them to take the vaccine?
Okay, so there are some really good lessons that have been learned in how to persuade people to do things. First of all, you don't ask a pale male, middle-aged man who's a professor to give them any advice. You look for peers that have made the best choices, and you advertise the fact that most peers in that circumstance or that social group have already made the decision that's positive for their health. And that's the way to take it forward. I've got a wee question for Emma, though. I don't know if there's time. But if you had a lovely parent that's going into a nursing home, would you want the staff in that nursing home to be vaccinated?
Emma?
I don't think that it should be. I do actually have family in a nursing home, and I don't think that it should be mandatory I completely disagree with the legislation passed by government that makes it mandatory for care home staff to be vaccinated.
Thank you.
OK. Thank you so much. That was social commentator Emma Webb, the head of research for the Adam Smith Institute, Matthew Lesh, and Professor of Outbreak Medicine at the University of Liverpool, Calum Semple OBE. Very good clash tonight. Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.